It seems to me, Robbo, that right now, Real Madrid, because, and Jules and I have been saying this all year, this is a badly constructed squad. There's nobody who does Tony Kroos things in midfield other than Luka Modric, who, of course, started 2 games in a row on even his 40th birthday, which I think is just insane. But obviously can't do this regularly. So you don't have the patterns of play. You have the injuries at the back. So inevitably in big teams, Real Madrid are going to become more risk averse, and the game plan is basically going to be, let's wait for Mbappe or Vini or Bellingham to do something spectacular. Pull a rabbit out of the hat, or maybe a Valverde rocket from 40 yards. And that's the game plan. Am I being unkind to Ancelotti? No, because I'm never unkind to Ancelotti.
No, but there doesn't seem to be patterns of play. There doesn't seem to be a specific way they're going to get the ball from back to front. They are relying on individual brilliance at times. And they were going to wait a long time for individual brilliance in that game because the 3 players you just mentioned didn't play very well. Vinicius Jr. was marked out the game to a certain degree, and then when he did have the chance, didn't do well enough. Bellingham, and I'm going to say this, for the first 60 minutes, I thought he was a disgrace. And Mbappe didn't do enough when he and couldn't find space. So
disgrace is a big word.
In terms of his attitude to the game, someone's got to tell him he's a midfield player. If you're a midfield player and you make a run forward and it doesn't come to you, or you lose possession, you don't sit on the floor and then take 10 minutes to walk back into position. That was outrageous.
But why? It's what Vini does.
But Vinny's a left winger and playing higher up the field. Bellingham's a midfield player.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is an issue, especially when you've got a 39-year-old in midfield. Yeah. So it's not like you've got, 2 beasts who can cover for you further back. From Atletico Madrid's perspective, I thought they could look back, look at the chances, and say, well, we came closer to scoring.
Yes.
And we would have been through. Real Madrid can say, okay, fine, but Vini put his penalty way over the bar and we wouldn't be having this conversation if he'd finished. Where do you stand? Who would you give it to on points, leaving aside the penalties?
On points, you'd give it to Atletico Madrid for getting the penalties because they did create more chances. The game plan that they had worked better than Real Madrid's. They stopped Real Madrid's key players playing well. And I thought they were quite clever with the way they had 2 or 3 touches before they got it into the front players and they allowed other players to go and join. And Alvarez looked sharp. He made 3 or 4 good efforts. So, yeah, I would say Atletico Madrid were the team that won on points. But you'd still like, in that extra time, this is your big chance. This is your chance to go and win the game. You were playing better than Real Madrid, and they didn't take that chance.
I guess maybe there's confidence in Oblak. Speaking of the penalties, obviously Vinicius missed his penalty, came off. Carlo Ancelotti revealed afterwards that Vini asked to be taken off. And wasn't going to take a penalty anyway because he didn't feel right having missed the earlier one. You're okay with that? You want your player to be honest like that, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, yeah, you don't want him to be brave and say, "Yeah, I'm going to take a penalty," and he goes and misses it. He's got to tell the manager exactly what he's feeling.
Now, the penalties were actually really, really close. 2 big incidents because, first of all, Oblak nearly saves Rudiger's penalty. It's not a good penalty from Rudiger, I thought.
No.
He wasn't sure should you give it to Rudiger or Hendrik. Rudiger took it. Other one, of course, was the Alvarez double touch. It made Simeone angry, but we watched the replay. It is a double touch, yeah?
Yeah, just about.
Those are the rules.
A double touch. They're the rules. At one point, I thought it might be retaken, but the rules say no, it's a double touch, so that's it.
And reportedly, Alvarez told the referee, yeah, it's a double touch. So that's it. I didn't want to be unkind. Maybe I was being unkind to Ancelotti, but that whole sort of approach of not really having patterns of play, in part because you don't have a playmaker you can play all the time, given Luka Modric's limitations at this age, in part because you don't have that solid defense. The approach that Ancelotti takes in these games, is this really his only option? This idea of keeping it tight and wait for the stars to shine?
Yeah, they have certain positional areas that the players play. You know that the right back's always going to get into a forward area. That's been the case. This year they don't hit the switch of play as much because Toni Kroos isn't playing. So it was Luka Modric that had to do a little bit of that. Tchouameni's not going to be a real passer of the ball. He then decides where he wants Vinny to play and where he wants Mbappe to play to start with.
And he hopes that
And he hopes that they follow instructions and they perform in those positions. He had to change it at half time because it wasn't really working for him. So he then put Bellingham as a second centre forward later on. I think it was after half time or halfway through the second half. So Vinny then played even wider out on the left-hand side and Bellingham played up front because Bellingham wasn't playing particularly well and not getting involved in the game and was having a little bit of a strop playing on the left-hand side. So he changed that. But he's when you've got players of world-class ability like Mbappe and Vinny Jr. have, and like to be free slightly, I think Ancelotti has to go along with that. I don't think if you said to Vinny,
so that's what you do. If you, I'm assuming, presume you never coached anybody as talented as Mbappe and Vinicius. Yeah.
Well, no, not in talented, but sometimes the most difficult players to deal with were the talented players.
And so do you understand? I mean, well, I would imagine that if you had time to work with these players on the training pitch, if you weren't playing every 3 days, you could probably find a better balance in terms of, I mean, because they had it last year, right?
You could.
Kroos.
You could.
And you could maybe even take more chances to be more progressive if you had more faith in your back four. Right?
I don't think that's a problem. I don't think he's worried about his back four. And it's just the pace in which they play at times when they're passing. I don't think that's fear. That's just they're not playing with enough forward momentum.
But you do that because you're more deliberate in the way you move, right? No?
Or the players in those areas aren't making the right runs for you. Or there's not the threat. You know, there's been Real Madrid games this season where it's crying out for the ball to be played over the top. You've got somebody with great pace, but you need that player to threaten the back, not keep coming short.
Right. And it's not something you can work on in training because you don't have enough training sessions.
Well, you can work on it in training, but it again depends on the players who are playing in those positions and what you do if Vinicius Jr. doesn't make the right runs, and if Mbappe, you keep saying running behind and Mbappe keeps coming short. At what point do you say, sorry, I'm leaving you out the side?
See, but this is an age-old issue for me, right? And why I think it's actually really hard to be a coach. And if you bring in a coach who has, you know, a very distinct way of playing and has the patterns of play and whatever. I mean, you know, think of Pep, you know, at his peak. You could make a point about Jurgen Klopp, Xabi Alonso, and so on. I kind of feel like they have to get all their concepts across in preseason and do it very quickly and succinctly. Yes. Because during the year, despite the fact that we pay these guys so much money, and Ancelotti's complained to me about this before, there's 3 international breaks in the fall where they go away for 2 weeks. And then you're playing every 3 days in the spring if you don't get knocked out earlier. You just don't have training sessions where you can actually work on anything.
Not enough training sessions. So every bit of the training session has to be effective. You have to
so you don't get the value of having these great visionary coaches to the same degree.
No, not as much as because they're playing too many games. There's, as you say, they're going on international breaks. But I go back to, say, Ronaldo at Juventus. We talk about coaches stuck with a player that's a great talent. Andrea Pirlo went there with certain ideas of how he wanted to coach. But he could never get his ideas across because he had one player that no matter what he was told to do, did something else. And so Andrea Pirlo said, I can't do what I want to do.